Now, more stories, insights, and analysis of Illinois policy and politics. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Opportunity Project. Once again, your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan back with Pat on this edition of Rising, and we're talking about the mayor's race in Chicago a little bit earlier in the show with our friend Charles Thomas, formerly of ABC 7 News, picking up that discussion, focusing on the Chicago public school system. Oh, and by the way, the sexual abuse scandal that has been unearthed by the Chicago Tribune and the reporting that continues this week with a principal who apparently knew or should have known, according to an inspector general's report, that a volunteer at an elementary school there had sexually abused 19 boys, alleged. He was killed by one of his alleged victims in 2000. Now this inspector general's report from 2002 has been unearthed detailing this horror, not dissimilar to the Catholic Church. And, I mean, you can't get anybody to pay attention to this other than the Tribune and the city. It's remarkable. These candidates hopefully will be held to account for what they knew or what they plan to do if they're elected mayor sometime between now and February. But in addition to that, we have the cost of CPS and the performance of CPS. Chicago Public Schools, Chicago City Wire story, again, one of the papers I started, serving 22,000 fewer students than it did 20 years ago. But it's taking in 50% more in property taxes from Chicago homeowners than it did 20 years ago in real dollars. So just to elaborate on this a bit, adjusted for inflation, today's dollars, CPS billed taxpayers $1.9 billion for 364,000 students in 1998, 20 years ago. Last year, it billed $3 billion to serve 342,000 students, half as much to serve 5% fewer students. Let's break this down on per pupil expenditure in comparison, provided some additional context. CPS plans to spend $7.6 billion total in 2019. That includes state and federal support, which accounts for almost half the budget. $3 billion in property taxes from Chicago property taxpayers. That translates into $22,390 per student. Hinsdale, District 86, spends $19,000 per student. Lake Forest, District 68, spends $18,000 per student. Chicago, $22,000 per student. 3/4 of the students in CPS are not rated as college ready. So less students, 50% more property tax extraction from homeowners, $22,000 per kid, which is significantly more than the richest school districts in the region, and 3/4 are not ready for college, 3/4 of an increasingly dwindling student population. Remarkable.
Yeah, so there's a few things going on here, and I obviously, Dan, pay taxes and live in that Hinsdale school district. So $22,000, $3,000 per student more in Chicago than in Hinsdale. Look at the differential in outcomes, right? The educational outcomes from Hinsdale. But that's not the real issue. The real issue is Hinsdale Central High School, District 86, shouldn't be paying $19,000 per student. So the real comparison is, what does it cost to go to Bennett Academy or Nazareth Academy or Loyola Academy? They're educating students at about $11,000 or $12,000 or $13,000 per pupil, while Hinsdale Central is doing $19,000 and the city's doing $23,000 and not educating anybody. And the differential is administration costs, teacher salaries, benefits, et cetera, through the roof. It has nothing to do with educating the students. Even in the Tony Hinsdale School District, which I rail against constantly, even up in Lake Forest, right? Everybody is overpaying for education, and they don't have to, and they do it because they're fearful. And the argument that the CPS people are going to make is, well, our kids deserve to have the per pupil spend the same as these other expensive districts. The reality of it is they're not delivering the results, and they don't have the base of support for that type of extravagance, right? And so what they need to do is figure out how to educate kids at a lower cost because it's unsustainable.
No. Nice try. The solution, according to CTU Union President Jesse Sharkey, according to Illinois State Board of Education Chief Tony Smith, I mean, this is a runner appointee. It's remarkable. I need to find up another word for remarkable or astounding because I have to say it too much when we talk about Chicago and Illinois. They've called initially for another $1,500 per household tax for public schools. That was statewide. Then they said, well, I don't know if that's enough. So what we really need to do is have a 2%, 2 percentage point tax, 2 percentage points of home value, property tax. 2% of property value, property tax designated for, I don't know, pensions and school funding, some amalgam of the two. Chicago Fed had proposed 1% of home value property tax for 30 years for the pensions. CTU said, I like that, but let's double it, 2% of home value property tax for public schools. So, you're talking about another $2, $3, $4,000 in property taxes for the benefits that have been conferred in the Chicago public school system, where 3/4 of the students are not college ready.
Well, and on top of that, Dan, they weren't college ready 20 years ago, and we're spending twice as much money, and spending more money hasn't proven to give any results of any kind, right? If someone said, look, if we spend this dollars, these kids are going to be superstars and they're going to go out in the world and all the good things and everything else, they're going to have great, productive lives for our society. I might be able to get my head around that, but the reality of it is those two things don't go together, and no one wants to stop and say, hey, it's not a spend problem. It's not a spend problem.
We're an input state, Pat, and an input city. We care only about the inputs. And what we are saying and have been saying for these past many decades, and what we may continue to say is, look, there is no price I won't pay to feel good about myself, regardless of the outcomes.